So we're now looking at the long exposure images, both side by side. I've got the 5DSR on the left, 5D Mark IV on the right. And from this range, they both look pretty good. Colors are a little bit different, but that's not anything that a simple adjustment can't change. Just going to zoom into the 5DSR image first. We're at 3:1. Now, in most circumstances, you're probably not going to be zooming in this close to any of your images, but this is just to show what the image looks like. And you're probably noticing a lot of noise, especially in the sky, in the darker areas, in the brickwork, in fact, pretty much everywhere. The noise levels on the 5DSR is not great when you're doing long exposure. It's not fantastic. Compare that to the 5D Mark IV, it is much cleaner. In fact, there's a huge gap. There's a huge difference between the two. If you look around these two areas, 5DSR is much noisier than the 5D Mark IV. Again, everywhere. I have recovered the shadows and the highlights a little bit on both images, and that may be adding to some of the noise that you're seeing on the 5DSR. But even after recovering shadows on the 5D Mark IV, still very clean. But this is where things get a little bit interesting, because I'm going to add a little noise reduction to the 5DSR, and you'll see how you're still going to end up with a much more detailed image and even an even sharper image compared to the 5D Mark IV. I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to go into the develop panel, and let's add a little bit of noise reduction. So we're going to be a little bit more aggressive on this one. You'll now see how the image from the 5DSR is actually noticeably cleaner than the 5D Mark IV in the sky and in the shadow areas, but it's still more detailed. You've still got so much more detail because of the higher megapixels. You can see so much of the brickwork versus the Mark IV, and I'm on 3:1 for both of them. And this is obviously motion blur, so not really loss of detail. And this is across the frame. Across the frame, you will notice much more detail on the 5DSR versus the 5D Mark IV, even when you apply an aggressive amount of noise reduction. Now, I don't enjoy using an aggressive amount of noise reduction on any of my images. I would much rather have a cleaner image and a much more detailed image. So I'll use techniques like image stacking and so on just to get that cleaner, more detailed result. Yes, you have to spend a little bit more time, but the end result is much better than what you can achieve with the 5D Mark IV. Having said that, the 5D Mark IV will reduce the amount of time that you need to be able to get a really good usable image. The likelihood of most people needing 50 megapixels is quite slim. So with the 5D Mark IV, that cleaner image straight out of the camera is such a fantastic feature. And I do enjoy having that. It's so useful. It is a very useful thing. Now, some of you might be concerned with file sizes, and just to give you a quick rundown, the 5D Mark IV average image size is about 32 megabytes and the 5DSR is about 55 megabytes. So there's a difference of about 40%. So effectively, the 5DSR is going to cost you about 40% more when it comes to storage. And if we just zoom into the full resolution images, you can see how the 5DSR is much more detailed and is much sharper than the 5D Mark IV is. Also, colors are noticeably better as well. Some of you might be thinking, well, you can shoot at 28 megapixels on the 5DSR, and I'm going to quickly demonstrate why that might not be a great option. So now we've got the 28 megapixel image on the right, and if we zoom in, you can see how the 5D Mark IV is actually noticeably sharper and more detailed than the 5DSR. This is because the compression of the 5DSR when you're using the medium RAW format isn't that good. So if file sizes are a concern for you, you're probably better off shooting with the Mark IV. I just wanted to do a very quick color comparison between both cameras. So I just took my daughter's building blocks to demonstrate this. So we'll quickly zoom into the reds first. And I mean, again, you've obviously got more detail on the 5DSR than the 5D Mark, but anyway, different comparison. So if you look at the reds, the red on the 5D Mark IV is slightly orange and a little bit warmer in tone compared to the 5DSR. You have a slightly more magenta tone to the reds. However, this is actually much truer to real life, to what I know of what the blocks actually look like. This is much closer than the 5D Mark IV is. So in terms of colors, the 5DSR for reds is doing a much better job than the 5D Mark IV is. If you move over to the greens, the green again for the 5DSR is more accurate. It's a little bit warmer in tone, but this is what the green actually looks like on the blocks. The 5D Mark IV, however, looks a little bit colder and it's got a slight bluish tone to it. Moving on to the blues, and this is where the 5D Mark IV is actually a little bit more accurate. The 5DSR again has a slight magenta cast to it. It's leaning a little bit towards the purple compared to the 5D Mark IV. And lastly, when it comes to the yellows, the yellows and reds tend to be quite difficult to demonstrate, but again with the 5DSR, the yellows are far more accurate. Well, not far more, they're just a little bit more accurate than the 5D Mark IV. The 5D Mark IV is just a little bit warmer in tone and leaning a little bit into the orange, and the 5DSR is more accurate compared to what the actual building block looks like. So in terms of most colors, 5DSR tends to be a little bit more accurate. Blues, 5DSR, not so accurate, but overall I'd say the 5DSR straight out of the camera is more effective at color representation. I also did a frames per second and a buffer test for both cameras. This is the Mark IV, and you can hear the 8 frames per second going there, and as you can probably hear there, it does slow down fairly quickly. However, it also continues on in this slower mode for quite some time. So I'm going to skip ahead in a moment. But the reason I did this test is because I didn't get a chance to shoot any actual sports, and also I'm not a great sports photographer. So instead, I thought this might be a good comparison between both cameras. And here you'll now be able to see how long it takes to clear the buffer. So it's fairly quick, it's not that bad. Okay, so just changing it to medium raw now and testing it again. And here it does last quite a bit longer than when you're shooting at full resolution. So if you want to extend the amount that you can shoot, then going down to medium raw is probably going to be quite effective for you with the Mark IV. And I think it just carries on. It stutters a little bit in between, but then with medium raw, it just carries on shooting and shooting, especially with a fast card. So this should be pretty good if you don't mind the drop in resolution. And moving on to the Canon 5DSR. This is 5 frames per second at 50 megapixels, and it slows down very quickly, almost immediately. It doesn't have a massive buffer. And then moving to medium raw, this doesn't actually improve the buffer at all. So if you're shooting sports or anything to that extent, you're probably going to be better off with the Mark IV with the bigger buffer, the higher frame rate, and also the better focusing system.